Hey, want to listen better and have a balanced conversation? Keep listening. This is Barbara Eubanks with Thoughts in Flight, where we come together to discuss important ideas in today's world. Today, our topic is the subject of listening. As many of us know, there's a lot more talking going on in most conversations and a lot less listening. What would it be like to have balanced conversation in our lives? And as our special guest, we have with us Vincent Bagnall, New York City speech and voice teacher with Performer Voice. That's performervoice.com. And he's going to discuss with us his experience with helping people to learn how to listen. Welcome, Vincent. Tell us a bit about your background as a teacher and what you have been dealing with on the issue of listening.
Well, I started teaching right out of drama school. When I finished my bachelor's in drama, I started teaching in the inner city in the West Coast. So we brought in Shakespeare to the inner city, and we worked a lot with motion, sound, and movement, and how people were listening physically. So we did a lot of mirroring and animal stuff and animal movements, things like that. And we just worked a lot on speech and getting out guttural sounds and actually listening to someone across the stage really intently. So I'm working a lot on balanced conversation with students so that they're listening to details, but also responding to those details in their speech.
I want to talk briefly about balanced conversation, and then we'll come back to the subject at the end. What does balanced conversation have to do with listening?
Well, that's a great question, Barbara. Thank you for asking. Balanced conversation is a way of showing respect for another person so that you can really take them in without just using what they're saying as a kind of trigger for something you wanted to say or a kind of point that you want to say from your life. You can't give too much detail too early. You want to really gauge the movement and the rhythm of the flow of the conversation. And having confidence and being clear helps towards achieving this. It also is about really building trust and earning respect and asking people questions, because then you're getting into their conversational style, their life, and then they're doing it for you. So there's a real reciprocal effort and maybe even a relationship that could continue after that.
What do you think is the hardest thing about listening?
I think the hardest thing about listening is to be patient enough to listen to each word and to also really follow through with what is being said so as to be able to respond the best possible way, in such a way that encourages a conversation that progresses, that is informative, that is somewhat mutual, and following that thread from the other person when we are so easily distracted.
When someone else is speaking, how can we deal with the loud, often contrary tapes playing in our head so that we can really hear what the other person is saying?
It's good to, though it can feel very structured, to talk to another person about 4 points or 5 points or 5 things you want to talk about beforehand so they can help you not forget what's going to be spoken. Because if you're too focused on this internal preparation, you obviously have a more of a strain in terms of really listening to what that other person is saying. But is there subtext? Meaning, is there a message or a meaning that is not necessarily revealed with words, but is also intended as part of the words? So I think it's good to sort of put aside, in whatever way is possible, the internal preparation so as to really be there in the moment, and somehow keep the prepared questions on a separate, some sort of separate mindset that you can return to, so you can really be in the moment and listen. Then you can really respond to those points that are being made to you first, and then go to your question, which is aside, that you had planned before, that preparation.
We hear about reading between the lines. What about listening between the lines? How can we listen to what isn't being said?
I think listening between the lines involves understanding a context in which the speaker is bringing or using when you have a sense of the context, you're able to go a little bit more between the lines and understand, why they're not being particularly upfront about certain things, and kind of carefully weaving around understanding what they're not saying specifically and why they might not be saying it. That helps you to read between the lines a little bit. And also asking a question yet again without putting them completely on the spot with whatever they're leaving out, but ask them another question that allows them to elaborate further, so you get more information that can allow you to come to a summary of what is still being said. You can also question them on the very missing point between the lines. One of the missing points between the lines you can question them directly on to reveal more of that without necessarily putting them completely on the spot, so they have to reveal something they may not have wanted to reveal. But a further question to counter that can be used with some care.
Have you ever asked a question where the other person totally missed the point? How can we deal with this situation?
What I have occasionally done is stop them right away and repeated the question, so because I wasn't getting the answer I wanted, but found that it was better overall with those experiences, instead of abruptly stopping the person who may have unintentionally answered a different question, because they might still be answering a question slightly different in a very powerful way, or being very revealing a great deal, or giving a lot of detail that is helpful and informative. I've often concluded that it's better not to stop them, but to let them continue with the answer, and to show some appreciation for the effort that they've made to finish that answer, and then come back with the question again, but not necessarily with the exact same words, but possibly repeat a question in a little different way, so it doesn't come across as, okay, now will you answer what I asked earlier, so there's not a sense of confrontation there, potential confrontation, but just a rephrasing of the original question. And there's ways of doing that where you can interject just a little bit and say, well, what if it were happened this way or that way instead? And you're really inflecting a different word, but using almost the same question. So it does allow them to have a second chance to hear the question.
Most people dread brain freeze, when we blank out upon hearing bad news, such as scary medical results. How can we prevent brain freeze when we're under stress?
One of the best ways to deal with that kind of situation is, there's actually a couple different ways that I've used. One is to ask the doctor to talk a little bit more about the results with detail, so that they're explaining the ups and downs, the ins and outs, without scaring you. Now, the problem here is that you have one expert who knows the field in and out, and you as the patient may not know nearly as much about the situation. If you're feeling a great deal of fear, it's very good to ask right away, are you saying, in lay terms, question the doctor directly related to your fear, so that you get an answer quickly, so that you can then go into detail without the impending fear of, oh my God, he's going to tell me I have such and such and such and I'm scared to death. From my experience, it's been helpful to tell the doctor what exactly my fear, or great fear, is at the moment, so that can be dealt with separately from all the otherwise helpful information that he's going to give me that will not be listened to because of the fear. So you explain the fear so that you can both deal with the fear, because the doctor doesn't necessarily know that you're experiencing this great fear. So you explain the fear, and then you deal with it from there, so he understands or he or she understands where you're coming from, and then they can sort of answer your fear. And sometimes you don't need to have that level of fear. It can be worked out somehow. Then you can get more information and understand where it came from and what to do next and what to ask next, so he understands your state of mind.
When you were asking a high-stakes question, such as, did I get the job? Would you marry me? Do I have cancer? Is there any way to gauge a person's response before actually asking our question?
And one of the ways you can do that is literally asking them that. What are your thoughts on the question of marriage? Is marriage something you're looking into? Is marriage something you're interested in? What are your leanings towards such and such a candidate? How do you feel about the personality? Do you ever vote for such a party? Asking questions that have lower stress level, that are not so impactful, can give you a lot of information that will pretty much determine whether or not that person will go in the direction or that direction. How do you feel about you and I and the things we've been doing recently on when we went here and there? How do you think it's been progressing? What are your concerns? How do you like our time? Getting a sense of where they're at, if they haven't revealed it already or it doesn't seem obvious in other ways, without having to feel that uncomfortable about popping a higher stakes question.
How can we cope with a speaker who's going on and on and on?
That's an excellent question, because we've all had to listen to someone who was very, very long-winded. And a couple of things happen. If you're in a situation where you're in a lecture hall, you can easily escape and fall asleep or go to the bathroom or do something like that. The problem with that option is that you're escaping from a situation that you might otherwise gain a great deal from, either with the connection with the person, a connection with people around you, or a greater connection to the topic. What I highly recommend in circumstances like this is to intervene with questions. Now, it may not seem appropriate at the time right away to automatically intervene with questions because the person is on a roll. However, the gain from asking a question, the results, are often very, very positive in my experience. It's all about learning how to ask the question and intervening. But if you show that you're sincerely interested in listening by repeating a word that they said and asking them to clarify that, or to explain that you didn't really understand exactly what they said, could they explain it in a different way, or could they explain and clarify what they meant? It does two things. It keeps the other person a little more on their toes so that they realize they're being questioned themselves and they're responding to those questions, which can change the energy from boring to more stimulating. We're not agreeing entirely because we're not receiving the information in a way that stimulates us. Now, we often say that it's just boring. They're boring. But in fact, it may be a topic we know very little about, and we may not have that particular patience that day to endure it. So what can help us? Our own questions. Asking the person to stop and elaborate further on the first point so you understand the groundwork, the foundation of the topic. They're learning to realize that they need to stop and create exclamation moments or points within their conversation so as to create a kind of better structure with a little bit of dramatic structure in it, which helps alleviate the boredom and builds levels.
When someone else is speaking, how can we deal with the loud, often contrary tapes playing in our head so that we can really hear what the other person is saying?
The general answer to the question is to become as familiar as possible with what your tapes are on a daily basis. There was a long time in my own life where I would say I made far-born generalizations, and I still do. I'll still catch myself making a generalization, and that generalization puts a cloud over the entire topic so that whatever is spoken over around that topic doesn't have much of a chance from another person if I've already put this cloud, especially if it's a dark cloud, over the topic. So if I become aware of the tape that I'm playing, so that I understand that it is tape, even if I think it's very real and very truthful. Another possible thing that I have done in the past is actually literally told the person who is discussing the topic that I've had this generalization or tape playing inside of me for 18 years. How can we talk about that so that tape isn't triggered? Because it opens up a dialogue. So you want, ideally, for someone to break that tape, if possible, because it allows that information further into your mind so you are awakening to what they're saying at that moment, not just something that contends with your tape or agrees with your tape, but just tape stays the same. That's one thing. The other thing is to make your tape into an argument for that person to defend or argue against themselves and to give an example to. So your tape becomes a pivotal part of the conversation. Both ways, you're removing yourself in some way from the tape, but you're still removing yourself for the sake of being in the moment in the conversation.
How can we stay in the moment and not check out when someone else is speaking?
The best way to help yourself be in the moment and focus is to allow yourself to be in a conversation where you are responding to the person with points from your own life or observations that you're making in the conversation. And in order to achieve that in a conversation, you very often have to ask the other person if that would be okay, because if not, it could be seen as that you cutting them off or something. So it's very important to let them know that that's something you enjoy in a conversation and helps you to stay focused and really listen to each point. To share, to feel free to contend with what they're saying or agree and why, but that you need them to listen and let you go on for at least 30 seconds to a minute or even 90 seconds so that you don't feel cut off and that there is a two-way conversation. More often than not, we'll awaken the conversation enough so that you are not fading off. It's easy to fade off if you don't know much about the conversation. Could you tell me a little bit more about this? I don't have a strong background with this. And that way I can find a link in my own life to understand it more. But it really brings you into the conversation more. You could even explain where you do have a lot of experience, a certain point where you have a lot of experience. And can you focus on that in the conversation? So you're both putting and investing in to the conversation so one person isn't fading off. Let's say you're the person who's doing the talking, the other person's fading out. How do you prevent that other person from fading out? And there's a couple of answers. There's one or two to that too. I think it's important to ask the other person how if they could respond to what you're saying, and if they feel that if they could tell you if you're being clear enough and detailed enough in the conversation, because the other person may not feel comfortable doing the things I just mentioned at all. They just not have that personality, and they'd rather just walk away or fade away. A lot of people don't speak up for ask for what they need. It's just not the way they were raised, or may not be in their personality. So if that's the case, which it often is, it's better to find ways where you are comfortable to intervene and to ask a question or to respond with an exclamation of a certain kind, because it gives the other person a lot of awareness that you are trying to listen, and that you just don't have the background, or that you are very tired, another very real thing. You're asking for help. You're asking to be more connected to the conversation. And there are other ways to do it too that you can think of and use on your own to keep yourself connected. But if the conversation is worth something to you in the big picture, and you have other issues like you're tired, you're fading off, or they're boring, or what have you, it's important to find ways to keep in that conversation, because that can help you in the future as a listener.
When it's our turn to speak, how can we create opportunities or hooks so that others will want to listen to us more closely?
Change of inflection is one. Today I went to the store, and I just want to start this speech with a story, and this is an example. Today I went to the store, the drugstore. That I better ring the doorbell. Ding dong. I rang the doorbell. I looked inside, but nobody was there. Up in the back I saw a man coming towards the door. I was okay. I was relieved. Somebody's coming. Then the man took his keys out and he opened the door and he looked at me and he said, "What are you doing here? We're closed." Now he knew who I was. I was a regular customer. But he asked me what I was doing there after 8 o'clock when they closed. Well, I said, "Look, I've got to turn this in because it's due today." And he took it. So that's an example of a story where I changed some of the inflections. I showed speed, I showed relaxation, and a little bit of drama. And that helps a lot if you're telling a story. It's the same thing when you're giving a form of a lecture or experience. You want to change the inflection. You want to speed up, you want to slow down, and you want to have sometimes some pauses, because that will catch the audience so they'll look at you and say, "Well, what's he pausing for?" And that wakes up the audience as well. A third way, so having that pause is a good second way. A third way is to stop in the middle of your speech rather quickly, after about 2-3 minutes, 2 minutes even, and put a question out to the audience. For those of you who agree with what I said, raise your hand. Disagree, raise your hand. I need one person to raise their hand and tell me why they agreed, and another person who disagreed to raise their hand and tell me why they disagreed. That gets the audience involved. They might be chosen next, they might be thinking, and they're involved, and then you can go on for a few more minutes in the next part of your speech, and it heightens the probability of them listening to you.
How do you deal with someone who has a terribly difficult accent? How can you get them to clarify what they're saying so you can listen better?
It's very, very important to ask, to tell somebody, if you're comfortable telling them that you're not as familiar with their accent or their speech as you'd like to be, but you're very interested in what they have to say, and it's important to have that balance of letting them know that, okay, so maybe you're not picking up their accent, they're not used to your accent, and there's nothing wrong with their accent, so there's not an insult, and you're also very interested in what they have to say. So those are two positive things. But could you please could you slow down just a little bit while I get used to the accent? Could you slow down and put in particular pauses? Then I can follow you as we go along. And then you can speed up a little and get back to your normal accent because I've gotten used to your speech a little bit. So slowing down and pauses are usually the best way.
What do you do with people who are speaking and don't take a breath? They don't pause.
I think there's nothing more powerful, more impactful than asking a question, because a question kind of forces them to. Now, it's not ideally what we had intended. We would rather they just take the pause within their own speech so we don't have to ask a question. And we might say, well, okay, that sounds all well and good, but I don't have a question. What if I don't have a question? It's very important to come up with a question anyway. So if you don't have a question, you can ask a where did that happen, or why did that happen, or who did that happen to, and why was it so powerful that you remembered this after 11 years? How did that happen? How did that make you feel? Questions like that intervene and help the person to slow down or to put in a pause. That way it doesn't offend them because you're not saying, excuse me, could you please use some pauses when you speak so I can take a break? This is too much. You don't want to offend the person like that.
There are times when we don't want to listen. Somebody's pestering us on the phone to buy something. Somebody is push a religious point of view or political agenda. Is there any way to disengage or politely, or do you have to just use bully tactics to get them off the line?
It depends a lot on whether or not you want to talk to them ever in the future. And if it's a topic or a subject or something you might want to buy in the future but don't have the time, it's very important to make it very clear that you do in fact want to talk to them about it, and that you even need a date and a time to do so, but that you are catching a bus right now or going into a meeting. Because if you just simply tell them I'm catching a bus or going into a meeting, they very often take it as you're just not interested and you want to get off the phone and you're using whatever excuse you can think of. And a lot of people do that. So it's very important, if you do and are interested, to select a date and a time to talk to them again and let them know to call, that you would even like to call them. Or they could call you, either way. And that way, you're bringing the moment back. If you are literally not interested at all, it's very important to make that very clear. That not only are you not interested, but that you would like to be taken off the list of calls. But to do it without anger or being very abusive, because that person has a job too and they're trying to make a living.
What is selective listening?
Selective listening is when we listen to particular parts of what a person is saying that is based on, very often connected to our preconceived knowledge, and so we select what we want to hear based on those triggers, what we already know, what we're expecting to hear. We choose those things to focus on, and the rest we can place aside, which can be a good thing if you are you have a particular agenda to listen to, a particular goal, that is, to listen for specific information. The downside to it, obviously, is that you don't hear everything somebody's saying, and that other person may realize that, and in the future remind you that you're not listening to everything they say and accuse you of being a selective listener. So it's important to know, if you are being selective, why and what your goal is, and if it's not supporting this experience or supporting you, it's important to broaden your horizons and really try to listen to other parts of a conversation that you're not as familiar with. It's very difficult for any of us to hear everything someone is saying, because we often have to hear so much. If somebody happens to be rambling on and on, it just becomes too much information. And those are, the circumstances where we yet need to ask for help. We need to ask the person, basically in a very kind way, to slow down or stop. It's difficult to know what paradigm you look at something through until you've discussed it and examined it and researched it and look at what areas you're most comfortable with or what you see. Everyone sees and listens to the world differently.
What would you say is the advantage of looking at someone while you are listening to them?
You show them that you respect them enough that you are paying attention. It communicates to that person that you have chosen that time to commit to them, and it gives you the opportunity to really get a better sense of whether or not they are listening. But the importance is pretty high in that it shows respect, potentially, unless they're not doing it in a respectful way. It raises the quality of time.
Is that what you mean by listening with your eyes?
Listening with your eyes is a visual construct. It's a visual way of showing the person that you're listening to them, and it aids you as the listener because you're making a concerted effort to connect with their eyes. It still doesn't mean you're going to necessarily not go off topic in your mind or be distracted in some other way.
Could you tell us how we can learn to listen to ourselves?
Well, one of the things we can do when we listen to ourselves is learn to trust ourselves. I think it's very important to learn to trust ourselves and our own gut, our own sense of intuition, which is a very challenging thing to do because, and this is also very often based on how we're raised. Are we taught by our parents and our family that we are worthy of trusting our own gut feeling, or should we ask someone else for help because we're not necessarily capable? We're given these indications by our parents and our family at a young age, and these responses by our family may not be accurate at all, but they may be transferred from generation to generation. And when you learn to trust your own intuition, very often you can hear messages and responses, physical responses, emotional responses that are our own voices. They could be historical thoughts that we've had years ago, coming back and just reminding ourselves of things that we've learned back from our school days. But it is important to try to listen to these different messages and sayings that we've had inside us to see where they're coming from. Are they coming from something our parents told us? Are they coming from a set of our own ethics? And listening to that message can be very important. It's also important to begin to listen to messages that we tend to push aside, like when we know we really don't want to eat a lot of sugary, fatty foods for our own sense of health, self-esteem, and weight, and all these things. But when we're put in front of them, we allow another voice to take over, and that classic, oh, it's okay, just this time voice, it won't do any harm twice a week. Which voice do you listen to? Sometimes the quieter voice is more important because there's a quiet, subtle voice coming in saying, it is very tempting, but I think the real better thing to do is to put it off and not act on this right away. And sometimes we just don't know which voice to pay more attention to, and we have to choose one and see what happens. And if we feel we made a mistake 2 days later or a year later, that's fine. We've learned from it, and we can exercise the other voice. We don't have to make the perfect decision each time. We won't anyway make the perfect decision every time. So it's important to listen to the different voices that are within us and try to figure out where those voices are coming from. Are we listening to our own intuition well enough? Because when we do listen to it deeper, sometimes it can be, an experiencing where we're hearing voices from actually different levels. Some voices that are not very loud. They're saying, hey, what about this ideal here? I thought you were going to give this a try. Try something different. Get to know this person over here who you're not used to getting to know. So listening to those other levels may be a little bit challenging at first, but then we can strengthen those more distant messages that we're getting to make them more part of our life, if that's something we want.
What about those annoying or frightening voices that we sometimes hear that haunt us, such as, you'll never do this right?
So we need to listen to those messages very loud and clear and determine where they're coming from. And if we can determine where they're coming from, know whether or not to put them out or to follow them more. The example of a negative message saying you can't do this or you're incapable is very often a part of a lot of people. A lot of tasks that we're about to or considering achieving are quite difficult and require a very strong part of ourselves, an intelligent part of ourselves, that we sometimes doubt. We may not be feeling well or feeling up to accomplishing something. So yes, we doubt our ability, and those voices rise higher and higher and higher because of how we feel, how vulnerable we feel, especially if we've been through something very, very difficult. So if we have been through something recently very difficult, and we understand that, then we know we might hear those voices a lot more, and we need to pay attention to our overall state of mind and make a choice that's going to help us more, even if it's not the one pounding at you like the negative voice. At that time, more than any other time, we must really reach down for something positive to remind ourselves of, such as an accomplishment that we've had.
What about the use of mantras or affirmations?
Mantras and affirmations are excellent because they're reminders of areas where we've learned before that are specific. And they're specific guideposts that can raise up our vibration, which we all deserve and need in our life. This is a journey, our lives. A journey, an obstacle course. And we are going to be taken down at times. We're going to be taken to places that are less than ideal, where we struggle and we start to doubt ourselves because we've just had a lot of challenges. Those are the times for those mantras, for those positive sayings that we know we can respond to. Why? They're brief, but they help us. They bring us back to those moments where we know we can achieve because we have before.
Can you give us some examples of helpful mantras or self-talk?
Yes, you can is a very good one. It's one of my favorites. Yes, you can. So when you're feeling, no, I can't, I'm not up to it, you know darn well the answer is yes, you can. But hearing it brings you back up again because you know deep down that you can, but you do need to hear it. You need to hear the mantra a few times. One day at a time is a wonderful one. You take this one day at a time, one game at a time. If a team needs to go out and win 4 consecutive games, they're probably not going to do it if they're thinking about the 4 consecutive games, but they think about one. We just need to win today. That's it. That's a different feeling than having to go out and do 4. If you're writing a book, you're not going to think about writing 350 pages this weekend. That's going to be very overwhelming for a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot. So saying I'm going to go out and just write 5 pages, and that's all, and then I'm going to let go, can really be helpful because it keeps us accomplishing something. So one day at a time, 5 pages at a time. 7 hours of work today, and that's it. Easy does it. Doing some days at work the easy way, getting through the day without plowing through the jungle every single day can help us for when the jungle does come and we do need to plow 4 days from now.
What about when you're facing a terribly fearful situation?
It's very important to make a list of some of the things you've done in your life, even if it's just 5 things. But I highly recommend to everyone to list 20 things they've done in their life that they feel are substantial accomplishments. Not necessarily, having to be a 4-year college degree or a high-level degree that took 4 full years of work, although that certainly can be one of them, absolutely. But even things that happened, every year or 2 years in your life that were quite extraordinary, that remind you of how strong you are. That's the most important thing. Very often, another message to remind yourself is that fear is very often not connected or not on the same level as what it actually is that you're doing, but rather is a feeling that we attach to what we're about to do because something about the process scares us. Now, if we can identify what it is that's scaring us, and we talk about it with somebody beforehand, we often find that fear dissipates quite quickly. It may not go away entirely, and we can't expect it to. We may still get up the next day with some fear. But talking about it, you makes you realize, wait a minute. Sometimes you'll say, which thing was I so afraid of? I talked about this, and I talked about that. I still feel some fear. But there isn't one thing that I'm going to face tomorrow that I'm actually really afraid of. I just have some fear inside of me. Then we realize it's a lesser form of fear that is just a little bit of anticipation anxiety that we know we're going to have when we're doing big things. And we know that once we get started with the day, very often that will go away. So reminding ourselves that getting started with the day will do a lot of it too. That will help us with fear messages or positive statements. And sometimes baby steps. That's the last thing I want to cover. It's this idea of baby steps. When I was working on my own clutter in the past in my apartment and also helping others declutter their apartments, the thing that I learned the best was to keep regular processes happening every day. So that is to say that on certain days of a decluttering project, you're literally going to take one bag out the door and that's it. Why? You have 3 other monstrous things to do that day, and you're not going to be at home decluttering very much, meaning you're not going to fill 5 boxes that day, which is a pretty heavy day of decluttering. But you'll get 1 bag out with 3 things in the bag. Well, that may not be a lot that day, but that keeps the momentum going, and it keeps you in the process of the decluttering so that you come back to it the next day and you go, oh, okay, we got that bag out, now we can move on to this box. Daunting tasks very often require baby steps. And then, last thing, rewards. So you do 2 or 3 baby steps, you give yourself a reward for having done that. Realizing that what you are doing is potentially daunting, and you need rewards and guideposts.
So you can listen to your own validation from yourself to yourself.
Right. You're creating a voice inside of yourself. When people work on self-esteem in their lives, they create what some other people might perceive as false mantras. They're putting things inside of themselves that are positive, that they may not naturally feel. But what we often don't realize is that those potentially false mantras, if you want to call them that, are wonderful, wonderful guides and aids that help us bridge the gap between how the lesser confident side of ourselves and the greater confidence. And we all need bridges. We all need ways to get to the other side. So those signposts that we put in there of great positive things, no, we may not be really feeling them in the beginning. It's very often that we will not be naturally feeling them when we're facing a daunting task. But we put them there anyway to remind us that, yes, there have been many other times when we have felt them, and we've helped others with those positive things, and now we need that help, and that's perfectly okay.
Is there any way that music can help us listen better, accomplish more, or get in touch with a deeper level of our own being?
Music, it can be very spiritual in that it helps us come out of our tapes that we've been playing all day, or our potential resentments that we might be building up towards someone. It takes us out there to a heightened feeling. We're listening to the creative work of another artist, and that brings us into the realm of their creativity, into their message that they might be sending through their work, and into their brilliance. So we're removing ourselves from any particular place we might be, so we connect to that music, which also helps us connect in a very strong way to a memory that we've had in our life when that song was first played, if it's a song we already know. So it brings us back to that time of our lives, which is a very different mental state than where we might be right now. Music is also healing, so if there's a lot of pain in our life and we need to grieve and work through that pain in a processing way, the music can help us work through the sadness by helping us to cry and release sadness and pain. It can also help us to connect to lighter times in our life when we weren't so burdened with worries. A lighter song.
What can we do to help someone else feel that they have been listened to?
To help someone else feel that they've been listened to, we can remind them of things they've said to us in the past that have struck us, that we recall. And that's important for us too, to improve our own, or to remind ourselves of our own memory. We all have a memory, and the more we practice our memory, the better it becomes. And a good memory can help another person feel very supported with their speaking and know that they're listened to. By reminding that person who's spoken weeks later, sometimes even years later, that of something specific that they said that meant something to you. That's very, very flattering to the person who said it, because it meant not only were we listening, but that what they said had good, strong content that we appreciated. You can also let another person know that we took their advice, or that we took what they said as advice and applied it to our life. And so these little points help that other person realize that they are being listened to. So they're specific memory boosters.
We have a friend who's going through terrible loss, and people say, well, I don't know what to say. How important is listening in that context when you don't know what to say to a bereaved person, and yet you're nervous about the awkwardness of no words?
I've been with bereaved people and remember when I was very young, not having a clue of what to say. What has worked for me a lot is to be able to just be with the person. Greet them when I walk in the door or give condolences, but after that, knowing that they're in pain, knowing that they may not be in a position to even listen to me rattle on very long, if at all, so to sit there and just be with them and to show that your presence and concern and care for them are physically there because you're sitting with them can be so incredibly and wonderfully powerful, because it's not putting the burden on them of dis-ease. I remember one time a friend of mine lost his mother, and I actually sat back in the chair and just kind of relaxed and put my head back and to put him more at ease, because had I sat up straight and looked at him, it would have put him on edge and he would have thought he should say something or I should say something. So to remove myself from that really tough feeling, I laid back very casually and just kind of put my feet up and asked him if he didn't mind if I just put my feet up a little bit because my foot's hurting. And it turned out to be wonderfully effective because because I was in this laid back position, which means neither one of us were expecting a lot of conversation because I was in this almost sleep-like position. And I didn't force him to have to talk, and I didn't do filler talk at all. Just let him feel his sadness, but I also didn't leave. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to let this person know that I was there for them.
So in effect, you listened to silence together and made a space for any communication that bereaved person might want to take advantage of or might want to convey, such as a memory of the person who's gone or a feeling of, depth of anguish.
Yeah, silence is a very important and powerful thing that we need to achieve or work on in our life, because silence allows each person to have the feeling that they may have at that time. They're not forced to be on another track of like positive or thinking or get over it or move on, and life moves on or whatever. It can be dangerous to impart any advice in those circumstances, or anything can be somewhat dangerous unless it's gentle and on the receiving end. If we can listen, like when we get up from a couch or we get up from bed, where we're just not thinking about anything. We're not thinking about our next task. We're not thinking about who upset us the day before. We're not thinking about something that reminds us of something that's coming up in 3 weeks. We're thinking of nothing. We can't remember what we were thinking about. And it's a beautiful moment, a beautiful place to be sometimes. Except that we try to force ourselves back to what we were supposed to be thinking about because we know we have things to do. But during those couple seconds, sometimes it's just 1 second, it's a moment of near grace, because we have this pure silence and non-noise. So it's a place to be that can be very good. So the idea is to expand that a few more seconds. If you realize you forgot what you're thinking, allow yourself to be there for a few more seconds, and a few more seconds after that, if you can, the next day. To just allow yourself to be in that place of nothingness, so you're really just hearing the silence and not something that's coming from another time of the past.
Is there any way we can turn those noisy situations into situations that are more positive?
Yes, meditation. Breathing and meditation is a very powerful thing. And learning to stop when we're becoming long-winded ourselves. So if you're a person who is very long-winded and talks for a long time because you're afraid of silence, then you can stop quicker and allow silence to come in, so that you're allowing for silence, even if there's noise around. That way, when you become more accepting of silence, you embrace it even when there is noise, and you can enjoy the beauty of silence even when there's noise. You can tune out a little bit more all the noise around you and just allow yourself to be, because you're not going to necessarily interact with that sound just because it's happening, whether it is to go turn it off or to get the people to stop talking. You're choosing silence, and that grows.
Are you saying this silence can increase its size?
Yes, absolutely. The silence increases its size based on your affirmation of it. You are asking for it. And in order to ask for it, very often we have to turn our phones off and our radios off and our TVs off and go to that place, even if we're expecting a phone call or even if we have lots of things to do that night. To take that 10 minutes of silence is very empowering and encourages future silence moments. And the silence moments can calm us from stress and from resentment, because we've chosen 10 minutes where we aren't going to allow our tapes to continue to chase us around, but to embrace just the silence. And the way we do that is by breathing. The body can be very powerful in aiding in this process, because if you take a breath in, and the inhale represents all the thoughts and the noise around us. So this can be actual external noise that we hear, or just thoughts haunting us in our mind. And we exhale that out with a symbolism of releasing those sounds away. Into silence. And inhale again. This time we inhale with more silence. So we're mixing the silence. We're encouraging the silence more. We're exhaling all the noise away and allowing a physical space, if you will, in front of you, a circle that we envision of silence to come in. So we're encouraging it. We're bringing it in. Even if it takes time, we're encouraging it through breathing and meditation.
Somehow your breathing reminds me of the ocean. What is the effect the ocean has on us, listening to the ocean?
Well, the ocean is nature, and it's Mother Earth, and it's very soothing. Ocean is a very steady, flowing form of nurturing. There's a flow and a sense of breath to it that coats us with relaxation and peace. It takes us away from having to focus on a task or something we need to deal with, and gives us ease. It's a motion, and motion is movement. It's the movement of things. It also represents a cleansing, a physical cleansing, of moving the old and bringing in the new kind of movement to go. It's an evolution kind of movement, the ocean.
It's really amazing, because I never thought of the evolution of listening as relating to the ocean, but truly the ocean continues to make its sounds in the earth and in our being. How do theater games help listening?
Well, theater games provide an opportunity to exercise skills that are not necessarily exercised every day. For example, the game Numbers, which is a wonderful one for theater, improv, and for actors, you go around the circle and you count as high as you can until a student repeats the same number. So the idea is that each student you begin with one, of course, and you continue upward. And once a student repeats the same number, the game is over for that time. And you set rules, ground rules, so that you have 3 chances before the game is over, or you eliminate some students if they repeat the number or something like that. But the idea is to go as high as possible, so that without repeating the number. Now, the skills that are learned from this exercise are wonderful, because it allows each student to pay attention to the entire group, the entire circle of students, with their eyes. And of course that's not easy, because you're not looking at each person directly, but you're turning your head and turning your eyes to each person to see who's going to speak next, to to see who's just about to speak next. And of course you have a split second to make a decision if you're the next person to say the next number. And if you are, hopefully you say it quickly enough so that no one else in the group says it at the same time, and vice versa. But it forces you to really listen to even a person breathing next to you, because they're about to say a number, the way they take that breath before they say the number. You could even argue that in the exercise mirrors, one is listening. And in mirrors, two actors stand facing each other in the same position, ideally a neutral position when they begin, and one actor assumes the role of leader, not necessarily by announcing it, but by becoming a leader and raising a hand or moving a shoulder or moving a different body part slowly enough so that the other actor can follow suit. And this is a form of physical listening, so that you are actually paying attention to another person's body language and their movements, which is a wonderful thing, because we don't always pay attention to each other's body language, which is a part of another's communication and can aid us in listening on a higher level, because we're more aware of the kind of communication one is sending us physically, whether it be moving away from us or moving towards us or shuddering or something that someone might do physically while we while we are speaking. So those are two examples of exercises that can influence one's listening. Also, any exercise that works with cues. So let's say you're having a group do a monologue together or do a very short scene together. Helping each other work with cues so people know what their cue is in a scene can help listening. And to eventually know their cue so well that they can really listen well to the lines that come before their cue, which can help them really be in the moment more.
How do interruptions affect our listening?
They're kind of signs on the road of conversation. You can get a sense from an interruption that a thought has come in the other person's mind that must be discussed. So interruptions can be helpful in the sense that they change the dynamic of a conversation, sometimes for the better, and other times they prevent or halt or slow down a flow of conversation that is already quite good and shouldn't be slowed. So if an interruption is made, it can be very helpful to take note of where one left off in the conversation.
Back to balanced conversation. So far, we've heard a lot about speaking and listening. Can you give us one way this ties together with balanced conversation?
When you learn to listen better, whether it be through breathing, meditation, looking for key points in conversations so that you're not fading off, hooks so that people are listening to you, providing those hooks in your or pivotal points in your speech so that other people listen and don't fade out, you're building a potentially balanced conversation. You're giving someone else a chance. You're building a structure in conversation to allow for another person to engage with you and for you to engage with them. It allows you to address someone else with your style, but also receive their conversational style should it be different, and very often it is. So that intermingling of different styles can be very harmonious and very pleasant.
Vincent, before we go today, can we give our audience an example of balanced conversation?
Absolutely, I'd love to. So here's what we do. We'll do something that I think is a really good idea at the beginning of learning balanced conversation, which is to set parameters of 20 seconds per person. And the other person must respond with something relating to what the other person said. So once I respond to you, I can then mention something from my own life. I can also ask you a question, and vice versa. When I say something, you ask me a question about what I said so as to maybe clarify it for you. So let's pick a topic.
How about laundry?
All right, so you begin and tell me a little story about laundry.
The other day, I was going to the laundry room, and all of a sudden, I noticed a trail of socks and what have you following me. And I checked my basket, and lo and behold, there was a huge hole in the bottom of the basket.
Now, I've had the same problem. I actually had a hole in a basket years ago, and I couldn't figure out where it was at first, and I realized it was in the corner. Where was your hole?
It was sort of down at the bottom and slightly on the side. I think I had crushed this straw basket as I was getting into the elevator, and the elevator door squished it and
my
broke
goodness.
it.
I actually carried a huge bag of laundry detergent one time to the laundromat with a huge basket that was working effectively. Unfortunately, by the time I got to the laundromat, there was no laundry detergent in the bag. And so I looked and I said, wait a minute, I just bought it. And I looked, and lo and behold, guess what? There was a hole in the laundry detergent bag. So it reminded me of that story, because you had the hole in the basket, I had the hole in the bag.
Well, if you were a golfer, you'd be happy to have a hole in the bag.
Very good, very good. Actually, I've golfed somewhat too, and from what I understand, you told me at one point you played miniature golf years ago, and I wanted to ask you, while we're on that topic, can you give me a brief little tiny story of what it was like to play miniature golf?
There happened to be a baby alligator on the golf course. So, have you ever had some creature come out of nowhere?
I've had animals come out of the woods in the north playing some golf. I didn't play golf very much, but I've had some animals come out, so it reminded me of that when you said that. But you actually had an alligator come out.
Yes, that's true. It was a baby alligator, thank goodness, or I would have been out of there in a hurry. But we watched it, and it crawled under one of the bridges. You know how they have little magical villages in golf. And what kind of animals did you encounter?
A fox in the woods. I've never seen a fox before, especially up in New England, but I saw one day, and I thought, wow, that's a fox. And I thought, wow, should I run away? No, it wasn't scary, and it didn't look like it was, following me or anything, but it looked very much like a fox. Had a tail, I could tell the tail and everything. And yeah, it reminded me of your alligator story, and I don't know if you've had that experience too, but it's amazing that we found something in common, the golfing, and neither one of us play anymore, but we're still sharing a story about golfing. Well, how did that go for you for a balanced conversation, Barbara?
Oh, well, it was fun.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. And this has been wonderful.
So I hope we can have you back again soon.
I'm hoping so too, and I thank you very much, Barbara, for inviting me and asking me these questions. I look forward to coming back.
Well, we look forward to having you back. We'd like to thank you, Vincent, for your wonderful ideas on listening for this episode of Thoughts in Flight. This is Barbara Eubanks with Thoughts in Flight, where we come together to discuss important ideas in today's world.